The speakers only have 3 or 4 minutes to start. There's a clock somewhere I'm told I can look at, so just like in the European Parliament, so you're all very used to that, all of you speaking against the clock. And the first theme is Europe's place in the world, which I won't try and define that, so let the speakers choose to interpret those words as they see fit. So I think we'll just start at the end and work back down to Dadara. So that means, Lars, you go first. Please take your microphone. It should be on. And then, as ever you want, just tell us how you see these issues and how the European election campaign will address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting us here today and being with you. Can we speak of the European Union as a player in world affairs? I'm convinced we can. We have a common security and defense policy. Nevertheless, we are still debating quality majority vote. We have the US and the People's Republic of China as superpowers. China ruthlessly trying to follow its global agenda. We have India not lagging far behind. We have some Gulf states who are sitting on vast economic and mineral wealth. And we have in Europe, the European Union, we have an aging population and a mass migration to contend with. And we have to think about who our friends are. I think this is very important in regards to this issue, Paul, you just addressed. I think, for me, it is very clear that our friends are countries like Ukraine, Israel, and the United States. And therefore, I think it is also of paramount importance that the European Union and its member states set out European interests for the future to survive in the struggle that is going on. Thank you very much.
Extremely brief, Lars. Thank you very much. I'll now turn to you, Sophie. Give us your views also on the election campaign when it comes to the issues to be discussed on Europe in the world.
Yes, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. I'm not going to repeat what has been said by my colleague, because everybody knows that the world is changing very rapidly and changing beyond recognition, really. We often face this question, and then we say Europe is at a crossroads. This time we really have to decide where we're going. But I think it was never more true than now, because I think at the start of this term, the President of the European Commission said with quite a lot of fanfare that we are now the geopolitical Commission, the geopolitical European Union, and I think that in particular, in recent months, we have seen that the European Union is not very credible as a geopolitical actor. And the thing is that, for many decades, we kind of, bobbed along on the waves. We were safely tucked away in the armpit of the United States. They would do external affairs and we would look after the internal market. And that was a really good division of labor. That is clearly not working anymore. And for a very long time, the European Union thought, we don't need to be a political giant because we're an economic powerhouse. Therefore, we rule the world anyway. We don't need to bother becoming a political entity. But if you look closely at all the relevant rankings, the European Union as an economic powerhouse is not doing so well. We are dropping on many of the relevant lists. So I really think that we have to grow up fast. And that also requires a very fundamental and thorough overhaul of the way that the European Union works. Because let's say, the method of intergovernmental fudge has sort of, helped us along until now, but it's not working anymore. And we are facing situations like the war in Ukraine, like the violence in the Middle East. We're facing the, in my view, fairly catastrophic prospect of the re-election of Donald Trump. So, the circumstances will force us to grow up fast. But then we need to change the European Union as it's working now. And I heard you say, Paul, at the start, well, it's not going to be very academic, you know, we want people to understand. I have to say we have to stop using that narrative. Every national member state, every country is having a permanent debate about how their democracy is organized. It's perfectly healthy and political. We need to do the same with the European Union, because the current European Union is not up to the task. This European Union is not fit for a role on the geopolitical scene. So we have to change, we have to talk about institutional reforms, we have to talk about how the European Union is really a political entity and how it should become a democratic giant, if you want, not just the geopolitical giant, but also a democratic giant. So I do think that this should be on the ballot paper in June, and then the citizens will tell us where they want to go and whether they want the European Union to be a geopolitical giant or not.
Thank you, Sophie. Before I give the floor to you, Juan, just to explain, I will be asking a few questions of the panel after they've made their introductory remarks. Although we have this kind of slightly more formal Q&A session towards the end, if there's a burning question you want to address to anybody on the panel based on what you've heard while they are speaking, just send it through that questions at TheMerode.com email address, and we'll try and put it into the conversation as well. Over to you, Juan.
Good evening to you all, and thank you for the invitation and for your attendance. The answer to the question is yes, not only as a must, but as a matter of existential challenge for the European Union. We're living in a globalized world, and that is not only a mantra, it is a fact. Globalization is the ultimate stage of mankind, of humankind. It's the ultimate stage of human affairs, and it takes global stature to meet the challenges ahead. We're facing revolutions underway, technological, economic, certainly, but also demographic. The world is changing dramatically before our very eyes, and it's about time that the European Union understands that we need actually to meet those global challenges, but by acting together. And that is the meaning of the commitment of this mandate of the European Parliament and the Commission, not only of the European Commission, but also of the European Parliament, going geopolitical. Geopolitical means the determination of geography into politics, in policy making. And it takes, certainly, that the European Union, in order to face the disarray of the international legal order that we inherited from the aftermath of Second World War, including United Nations and its obsolescences, which are only obvious, in order to come to terms with neighbors which are closer than ever before. We have never been so close as the giant Russian neighbor, which is overarching, neighbor to Japan or to North Korea, but also direct neighbor to the European Union, to the United States in Alaska. And the same goes to Africa, which is undergoing a demographic revolution, which is a huge challenge for an aging society, as is the case of the European Union. So it certainly takes that we understand that we have to mature and grow up fast, as it has been said so many times through this mandate of the European Parliament. Growing fast means that, yes, we have a mandate of building up a European common security and defense policy, but you know that it's been subject to the unanimity rule, which is absolutely cumbersome, absolutely dysfunctional, and we have called so many times for treaty reform in order to overcome the shortcomings of unanimity rule and making it possible to actually come up with decision-making and make up our mind when it comes to facing the challenges, not only acting in the current dispensation of the international legal order, the United Nations Security Council, with one voice in the General Assembly of the United Nations, going global with one voice and making a voice heard and recognizable, and most importantly, being of influence. It is seldom told that the European Union is the #1 global power in humanitarian aid and cooperation to development, and yet we are not influential enough. We are not making a difference when it comes to turning the soft power into some kind of hard and, if needed, coercive power. And it takes that rush into this combination of must and existential imperative, and the sooner the better, because member states are simply too little, too small in order to make it on their own.
Thank you, Juan. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Paul, and good evening, all of you. I'd say thank you for joining us in the warm-up to a decisive political year, 2024. I'm from Germany. We have regional elections in a lot of Eastern German countries where it is not sure whether the right-wing party that undermines our constitution, our democracy, may end up being the strongest. We look at the European election where it is not sure that it may end with a right-wing majority. And we look at the US election where it is not sure if Trump will win or not. So you can see the worst case on the horizon, all of these three decisive elections going wrong. And you can see the challenge that we all have, that we cherish democracy and want to build a European Union united in diversity, as is the original idea of this continent. And I'm glad that so many of you turned out tonight to discuss this with us. And I hope we can carry the spirit over the year, because it will need each and every one. And that brings me to your question of the role of the European Union in the world. Well, clearly, everyone who has hopes for a democratic form of governance, for political freedoms, looks at the European Union as a beacon of hope. They still do. Many say to me when I travel to Afghanistan, Iraq, you're the only ones who still care. And I want us to continue to be this power. But our experience is that wherever the European Union speaks with one voice, especially all the policy fields where competences are on the European level, we are strong. I just remember last time when we had a Trump presidency, and he tried to challenge us with a trade war. Well, he had to find out that he couldn't play divide et impere and go to France and Germany, but that actually trade is a European authority, and we told him, he backed off, and that was it. But in policy fields where we are not European and united, we are still weak. And that is foreign and defense policy, and we simply can't afford that at the moment. Defense policy, foreign policy, is a flea circus of 27 member states. Someone's trying to coordinate them, and sometimes it works. I thought it would change when we had the financial crisis, because it would just save us so much money if we wouldn't have 27 armies. I thought maybe we come over it when we had the Trump presidency. It wasn't enough. I thought we would finally come over it when Russia attacked Ukraine. We are still not. And when I hear all these discussions now again about strategic autonomy, about a European Defence Union, I'm not even 40, but I feel old, because we're having them for, 15, 20 years. And what I start doing, I do it with Macron, I do it with Weber, I do it with Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, with everyone who tells me about that. I say, okay, I'm all in for it. But tell me, which competencies are you willing to shift from national level to the European one, so that we actually have the power to build it? And then I'm in for discussion. And so far, then it remains silence, and I hope we will move beyond that in the 5 years to come.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Now over to you, Adara. Last word.
Thanks, Paul, and I share all my fellow panelists' thanks to the organisers and everyone for coming out. It's the first campaign debate that I'm aware of, certainly the first one that I've been involved in or attended. So we are in for an exciting number of months, and a very important number of months. And without being patronising, I think it is always important that we as Europeans acknowledge that we remain the envy of the world when it comes to our independent judiciary, the freedom of our press, our democratic principles, our social market economy, and how we protect our weakest. But the world changed on the 20th of January 2017, when Donald Trump became President of the United States. And the geopolitical environment at the time meant that essentially the world got away with having someone like Trump in the White House. If that is to happen the next time, given the current circumstances our world is in, I don't believe we will be so lucky. And the sad reality for us as Europeans, and the obligation for us as Europeans, is if you look around this planet we have, nobody else, no other population is large enough, wealthy enough, or has the democratic principles enshrined within its borders to actually step up if, God forbid, the Americans step back. I hope they do not step back, but we really must start preparing for the worst and perhaps hoping for the best. We have proven as Europeans, when we've been forced to react, when we've had crises, particularly COVID, and our solidarity with our neighbours in Ukraine, that we have the capacity. Now, I have heard nothing from any of my panelists so far that I disagree with. But hopefully we will start discussing how we achieve this goal of putting Europe back where it was for hundreds of years, very often behaving very, very poorly. But Europe and the European Union and its people and our neighbours, including my own neighbours in the United Kingdom and others, we now have an obligation to take our place with the Americans or without the Americans, to demonstrate that the values that we want for other parts of the world and other parts of the world want for themselves, whether it is African countries, Eastern countries, Southern American countries, they will look to us ever more if the Americans continue, as they have been for some number of years, isolating themselves from their role that was forced upon them to a large extent in this world of ours. So in 2019, the geopolitical landscape actually wasn't such a huge issue in the election. And there were other issues, such as climate and so on and so forth, that brought Europeans, for the first time, I think, in about 3 electoral cycles, back to the polls in greater numbers than previously. And I very much hope that we will collectively, as political parties and political families, will bring a campaign to the people that will discuss these issues, that we will listen to them, and that following the European elections, we will continue to have the one thing that many other parts of the world do not have, despite our differences on these panels. The European Union works by consensus, by coalition, and by agreeing on the big things first. And I think it's a good start for our panel. We've agreed on the big things first. Thanks, Paul.
Well, that might happen with the European Parliament, but everybody agrees. Before I ask you all a question to follow up on that, before we move to the next section on the economy, a quick question to Sophie from the audience. Sophie, you are standing for vote this time. Ask the questioner. Their current MEP sits with the Green EFA group. If elected, which group would you sit within? Renew, the Greens, another group? The scoop this evening?
No, look, Volt is a pan-European political party. We exist in more than 30 countries, and the idea is that we get so many MEPs elected that we will form our own political group, a new purple political group. Purple is our color. Until then, until we have that group, we will have to choose where we sit, and we will discuss that internally. Damian was elected in 2019 and chose for a variety of reasons to sit with the Greens. I have changed parties, as some of you may know. I was always a member of the Liberal family, so I've chosen to remain there for the remainder of the mandate, and we'll see afterwards. But I think the most important thing is that, if I may, we have heard in recent days and weeks a lot of predictions about, and Hannah also referred to it, the composition of the European Parliament, but also national elections, local elections, where the far right may score a massive victory. Can we please not throw the towel before the elections? Can we please make an effort and make sure that we at least keep their victory as limited as possible? And I think what we need to do is not try and compete with the far right in order to occupy the same territory, but offer them an alternative proposition. And I think as Europeans we can do that. We can give hope without turning to the far right.
Thank you. I'm going to try, let me try and paraphrase a bit what I've heard in this first round. As you say, Dara, a lot of consensus, that maybe simple a shared diagnosis as well. Lars talks about, we know who our friends are, we need to work with them more. Sophie said, okay, we're a geopolitical commission, as van der Leyen said, but we are not credible as such an actor. We need to grow up fast. We're not quite the economic powerhouse we used to be, you said, but we have to be also a political powerhouse, not fit for the task, you said, Sophie. One said something very similar, huge changes, but also in demographics beyond the technology we often don't talk about enough. You also use the phrase, Yuan, we need to grow up faster. We are a huge power when it comes to things like humanitarian aid, but that doesn't seem to be converted in other kinds of soft power. Hannah, you said that when the EU works together, it shows unity, it is strong. Dara says we are the envy of the world, but now you said also we have an obligation to take a more rightful place. So the question to all of you briefly, because we have to move on to the next section, I'll go down the line again, starting with Lars. Okay, we know what the problems are. We have more or less a shared diagnosis, as I said, but how optimistic are you, each of you, that these changes can be made, given that time is ticking, and we certainly haven't got time to spend 10 years in some intergovernmental conference talking about voting procedures. Lars, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Please don't get me wrong, I'm not a pessimist, but I like to see and analyze facts. And fact is that we are standing at a crossroads, and therefore it is important to make an analysis. The European Union, we as Europeans stand for rule of law, democracy, protection of minorities, freedom of press, etc. But we have to also stand in for these values. And this comes at a price. It's not free of charge. The price is that we need to enhance our security and defense policies and our security and defense expenditures. Some people don't like it, and you mustn't like it, but I think this is the reality. Otherwise, and let me just cast some light on an event that happened on October 7th. The brutal attack of Hamas on Israel and on Jewish people in Israel, and the rallies we see in European cities that support ISIS, Hamas ideology. This is undermining our democracy, and this is very dangerous. So we have to make an analysis. What are we able to, what are we willing to spend to protect our way of life and our values? And therefore, I think it is very important to enhance our security and defense activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lars. Sophie, back to you.
Well, two things. First of all, I would like to say that, yes, some countries are our friends as long as they share our values. And looking at some of the governments that you've mentioned, I'm not so sure that they still share our values, or with Trump in the White House will share our values. And I also think that a lot of what's happening in the Middle East at the moment is not in line with our values. I would just like to say that. It's not a matter of choosing sides. It's not about being tribal. It's about the principles that we stand for. And the second thing I'd like to say is, okay, let me make it very simple for this very educated audience. If we want to be a geopolitical actor, including a defense branch, we have to abandon intergovernmental Europe. Intergovernmental Europe does not work. The European Council is totally incapable of leading the European Union in this area. And I read there was an interview with Manfred Weber in Politico, I think it was, saying, yeah, now we really have to invest in this, the military union. And I think That's great. I'm all for. But what does it actually mean? Because, yeah, we can ramp up the production of, ammunition and weapons and materials. That's fine, and we can work together a little bit. But if we really want to have if we really want to be a defense union, a military union, then we have to address the issue of governance. Do you really seriously think that the intergovernmental fudge that I just referred to, that is going to serve in times of war? In times of war, you need leadership. You need clear, I'm not a military man like you, but you need, I think, clear lines of command. You cannot sort of have endless horse trading about what we're going to do. So we have to talk about this. You cannot just say we're going to ramp up production and that's it. That doesn't make us a military or defense union. So we'll have to address governance. I'm very sorry, it's not boring, it's not academic, it's about our future, it's about our capacity to act in this world. So I think it's a fundamental question.
Thank you, Sophie. Juan?
Well, my first point is that when it comes to politics, you cannot allow yourself to be a pessimist, can you? But it's not compelling to be an optimist either. You have to be realistic, and you have to look at facts as they are. And when it comes to politics, in democratic terms, it takes a fight. And that is that you need to combat real hard in order to strive your values. And I know which are mine. I'm a social democrat. I've been a Spanish socialist all of my life of age. And I know that the European Parliament is the only directed institution in the European architecture, the only one directly legitimized by universal suffrage of nothing less than 450 million European citizens. So it's the democratic engine of the European decision, policy, and lawmaking process, because the European Parliament happens to be a lawmaking body. The thing is that in the European Parliament, there has never been a political group out of pluralism of the European social fabric that could make it on its own. We always had to build majorities, and that's the fight about building majorities in which your values do have a chance to change things for the better. So when it comes to economy, the main aim of the socialists and the S&D group is precisely social pillar, social rights, protecting the weaker, protecting the many and not the few, protecting the weaker, not the stronger. And in every policy, in every area of policy, which is high priority for the European Union of the present day, and it'll be tomorrow after the mandate, which is the digital agenda, artificial intelligence, green transition, and of course, migration and asylum, and rule of law, democratic values, then we gotta make political sense out of each and every one of these battles we are to fight. So the green transition has to be just, fair green transition, not leaving anyone behind.
We'll come to that in a second.
Keeping the social pillar. When it comes to economic growth, we have to care about the quality of jobs, labor rights, and of course, not precarious work, good salaries, and protecting workers, and the dignity of work in itself. And when it comes to migration and asylum, we have to care about the rights which are involved, not seeing migration and asylum, migration, which is a fact, as a threat to the European safety or the European identity, but as a fact that we may only hold, and we may only handle if we act together, because there is no chance for a member state of the European Union, as bigger as that member state thinks it is, in order to make it on its own, not accounting for the rest of the vast and accomplishing the European promise and the European mandate, which is enshrined in treaties.
Okay.
So those are the kind of battles we have to fight, and it's not about being pessimistic or optimistic. It's about fighting the battle.
Right. We'll come to that in the next part of the discussion, when I promise. Hannah, over to you, Hannah.
Still on the security, right?
How optimistic are you about all the changes that need to be made to make Europe more of a geopolitical actor?
Right. Well, the good thing is, apparently we have agreement on the goal. We want European Union to be a strong, independent actor in this world, and I was surprised to hear across the board, we want to have a common security and defense policy. So now the road for us is to describe the way to get there. That's actually quite technical, and to me at least, it's the easier part of doing politics. Because if everyone has the same goal, then you just discuss the way to get there. And as I said, the way to get there is member states, so capitals, need to realize that certain decision-making authority, certain capabilities like tanks and planes, and other stuff needs to be transferred to the European Union, so that we have a joint decision-making that just then comes with the mix of qualified majority and the parliament, because the European Parliament then would also play a role, which is the place to have debates about European defense, because it doesn't make sense that Germany has its own debate, and France has its own debate, and Spain has its own debate. European defense needs to have European debate, which needs to happen in the European Parliament, which happens if we are co-decision makers. That's what we learned over the past, and that is the way we have to go. Now, I just want everyone who will say for the next 5 months, you will hear a lot of Sunday window dressing speeches, to tell what they are willing to transfer to the European Union. And if you join me in that one, I'm optimistic that at least we will have, for once, a proper debate. But allow me one last remark on security. Security is also that everyone who lives in this European Union feels safe. That is also part of security, and we should never forget. There are people who are certain minorities, who are LGBTI, who have a different skin color, who migrated here in the last 5 years or even 30 years ago, who are really afraid about political discussions that are happening on remigration or other fancy topics that basically mean they should be kicked out. I have kids coming to visit me and they ask me, where should we go? In school classes, and they are born in Germany. And we also, when we discuss security, have to keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. A brief last word from Dara on this part of the conversation.
Yes, competition policy, trade policy, to a large extent environmental policy. We've led the world because we've been united, one voice for the European Union. Defense policy, foreign policy, justice policies are member state competences, and we are fractured, and we have no global or internal perspective on those. Until that changes, we cannot have a proper foreign policy. Until we get rid of qualified majority voting when 27 departments of foreign affairs are in the ears of their foreign ministers before they arrive at a foreign affairs council meeting, we will not have a foreign policy. Until we have a proper European Minister for Foreign Affairs, we won't have proper European foreign policy. But we will get none of that until the member states, and now I mean the two largest member states, concede power to the centre. And whether it is through the Parliament, I would wonder, but the reality is that what we are asking would be a Chancellor or a President collectively with other member states to accept that their national power and the power of their own office will have to be reduced for the greater good of the European continent. We've seen it in monetary policy, we've seen it with the foundation of the euro. Member states gave up something they thought was sacred to them, the name of their currency. And that bravery, frankly, we all want the same thing. I do not see it in Berlin. I do not see it in Paris. But if we are to change and step up to where, as we all agree we have to be, we are going to have to see bravery in those and other capitals. And we are going to have to collectively face down countries, many of them smaller ones, that seem to feel they can block the view of the majority in a far, far more robust way than we have to date. And it is one of the great advantages. And by the way, 1 in 4 people will vote in the European elections on average, based on analysis we did at the last European elections, on European issues. 75% of people in Europe still vote on national lines in European elections. But the European elections allow us to get these things discussed in the context of elections from May to the first week of June. And that is the question we must ask of the leaders of our national capitals. Are you willing to step back and allow more power to a central part of Europe so we can have a geopolitical voice globally?
Thank you, Dara. I'm getting lots of questions from the audience of a broadly political nature, so I'll bring those into discussion at the end when we have a broad discussion about the politics of the European Parliament, the likely political makeup of the next European Parliament. Quite a few questions also on economics and the economy of the EU. So let's move on to that now. Sophie said at the beginning, the European Union, I hope I'm not misquoting you, Sophie, is not the economic powerhouse it's sometimes portrayed as, or it's sometimes like to think itself is. We have reports coming up quite soon from previous former Italian Prime Ministers, Mr. Letta on the single market, Mr. Draghi on competitiveness. It's easy to be generous to migrants, easy to be generous to Ukraine and other parts of the world, and humanitarian aid that one mentioned, if Europe's economy itself is doing pretty well. That is not the case at the moment. So again, we'll go down the line, starting with you, Lars. How optimistic are you, or pessimistic, that Europe's economy can turn the corner and start growing again? Because at the moment, that is clearly not the case.
Well, I think we have faced various other crises in the last 10, 20 years, financial crisis, COVID, now the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. And I think we will find solutions. It's not easy, but I think our economies will certainly recover to tackle these challenges. And let me just point out that I think it is of paramount importance that the support for Ukraine doesn't wane, otherwise we are in danger. It's very costly, it's financial costs for all of the member states, social costs, the refugees, Ukrainian refugees that came to various countries of the European Union. But nevertheless, our support needs to be upheld, and I think our economy will be able to cover these costs and will recover in the coming years, quite sure.
Thank you, Lars. And maybe the rest of the panel also, to what extent you think, in terms of Europe's economy or Europe's rebooting of the economy, and maybe to be more precise, that the role of the green transition, given there seems to be a certain amount of pushback on certain green initiatives. Sophie, over to you.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right, and I think that is a strategic mistake, because the transition will come, like it or not. And I can see that certain political parties, not least the EPP, want to backtrack. But the rest of the world isn't waiting for us, and they're moving ahead. And we are in several areas already losing the economic battle with China. And I see a kind of breach in our usual policies. I mean, competition and state aid were always sacrosanct. It was the exclusive area of competence of the European Commission, and that was more or less accepted. And we were very strong in innovation, competition, trade, etc. There's been a clear rupture with the pandemic and the crisis that have ensued, and we have rightfully given a lot of support to our citizens, but also to our companies. But I get the feeling that we very rapidly got addicted to those same subsidies, and that national industries who are very close to national governments have also put a brake on let's say, the steps that need to be taken. Quite literally, I heard government leaders say we need to hit the brake when it comes to the Green Deal. But China is hitting the accelerator, and I don't think that the United States are going to wait for us. So I think we need to get back on track. We need to become competitive. We need to become innovative. We need free trade, because there too I see the old protectionist forces return. And I think today, in particular here in Brussels, but also in Paris and some other places, those questions are very much on the agenda. And I do think that, of course, we need to do free trade and international trade agreements on our own terms, but we need them. And we have learned lessons from the pandemic, but let's not make the mistake, have the wrong reflex, and have the pendulum swing back to the old protectionism. I think we can be remote. We're still a powerhouse. I'm not saying that we are, we're not sort of poor, but if you look at the rankings, then we are dropping, and I think we need to curb that trend. And I think that we can do that, but we need to wake up and invest in that more.
Thank you, Sophie. Juan?
I started by saying that we're living in globalization with no turning back. And that means that when you go to a global perspective, in comparative terms, it's still true that the European Union happens to be a beacon of economic prosperity, social cohesion, and for sure, fundamental rights and democratic process with regularity of elections in every member state and at European level. Okay, that is true. But it's also true that ever since the latest format of the European institutional architecture entered into force, which is the Lisbon Treaty, we have seen a series of episodes of crisis deeper than ever before in the European experience of supranational integration, getting started with the Great Recession, which was terribly managed with a disaster as an outcome, raising inequalities between member states and within member states. So we have to learn the lessons. Getting started with the Great Recession, because then there came the Brexit, then there came, of course, the rise of national populism, extreme right, illiberal regimes, and the COVID pandemic, and Putin's Russia aggression on Ukraine. Of course, we have seen a series of episodes of crisis, but we got to learn the lessons of each and every one of it. So first lesson, not repeating the mistakes of the management, the terrible management of the Great Recession, austerity-only politics. That was a catastrophe. So by now, we need to put in place a multi-annual financial framework which has the flexibility rules and the federal instruments we are striving for. We're working hard in order to put in place financial instruments at the federal level, getting started with the so-called mutualization of the debt. That was precisely the point of the recovery fund. That was precisely the point of the so-called Eurobonds, which were beyond reach for years, and now they are somehow in place, learning the lessons. Then we need, of course, to combat inequalities, because inequalities are very bad economic politics. That means inclusive, gender equality, overcoming the gender gap in all of the European Union and its member states. That means, of course, giving labor works a dignity and good salaries, and not basing the growth on low wages and precarious jobs. On the contrary, consolidating a social pillar, a strong social pillar. And then, of course, when it comes to the green transition, which is a must because we have to decarbonize the economy, the sooner the better, we need to make sure that no one's left behind. So it means that green transition must be fair with what we have called a fund for adjustment to green economy, so that the opportunities at site have not an unbearable social cost. That is also a lesson to be learned. And finally, the same goes with artificial intelligence and the digital agenda. We have to care it's compatible with the standard of fundamental rights, which happens to be, in European Union, the highest in the world, and we should be proud of it, the highest in the world. Of course, it arouses tensions, even in the transatlantic dialogue with the United States. Of course, it arouses tensions, even when relating to third parties or global actors. But the final point I would like to share is that for certain, we don't have to compete with Russia, with China, with India, going autocratic, cutting liberties, or watering down the quality of labor or wages and salaries across the European Union. We cannot compete with Russia by behaving Russian, or compete with China by behaving Chinese. We need to keep European and keep good care of this inclusive social model, which is compatible with the highest standard in the world of fundamental rights and democratic liberties. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. Over to you, Hannah, please.
Thank you, and I'd say Sophie is right. The transition is coming. I would even say it's there. It is quite clear we can't continue our business model the way we've done in the last 20, 30 years. And now we have two options. Either we are shaping the transition, or we try to hold on to how things have always been, and then at one point we just have to run very, very fast, and we're not sure if we will catch up. If I talk to CEOs when I'm traveling Europe, well, I guess you have an idea which of the two options they want us to choose, right? to shape the transition, which means to set standards. How should green energy look like? How should we regenerate it? How should we store it? How should we send it somewhere? They want us to set the standards. They want us to help them on the path of the transition, so have smart subsidies that do not incentivize the old way of doing economies, but that help them to get ready for the new ways. And they want all of this to be reliable. They don't want us to change the rules every 2 years, because that's not how investments work in companies. And that's why they are actually quite happy with us having clear goals in terms of CO2 emission reduction by 2035, by 2050, and now describe for each of the sectors, buildings, mobility, energy, how to get there, and then just do it. And that's why I think the challenge for the next 5 years, I would say the task, is to just continue on the path and finish what we have started with the Green Deal. And not every time someone says, oh, it might be a challenge. Of course it's a challenge. It's change. Change is challenging. To get nervous and start saying, oh, now we backtrack, and now we change the rules again, and maybe we got to go a bit slower. No, we need to make sure that everyone knows what the rules are, everyone gets the subsidies they need, and then we just keep on shaping and leading the transition. And we see other regions, especially the Gulf, but also the States, once the European Union sets and defines standards, they take the standards, they apply the same standards. And that's how we can really be shaping this transition. Yet, I think it is important that the way we are growing, we have been growing together in the economy and finance in the European Union. The way we are now growing together when it comes to stopping the climate crisis and shaping the economic transition, we also need to make sure that we grow together when we speak about social standards, about health insurance, having the same standards across the European Union, about unemployment benefits, having the same standards across the European Union, about education, having the same standards. Because if everything else is free-flowing, but on the social we still have these very big differences across the Union, it becomes unfair. And the strong ones are going stronger and the weak ones are going weaker, and that's not the European idea. So I think this is the pillar, the social pillar, that we need to develop side by side, the economic and the environmental one in the next 5 years.
Thank you, Hannah. Final word from you, Dara.
So the first section, we talked about the failings of the European Union in a geopolitical sense, and there's no question that one of the great successes of the European Union has been under President von der Leyen, the European Green Deal, the way the Parliament, the Commission and the Member States work together to create the most ambitious environmental suite of policies to achieve our targets that the world has ever seen, and remains in a leadership position. I agree with what Sophie said. It is time, though, that we get real and we make sure that we also have a competitive European Union. And the targets that we set within the Green Deal remain. I'm always interested, or more recently being interested, and maybe it's a factor of, you know, the EPP still doing reasonably well in opinion polling, that somehow we're the ones that are being accused of backtracking. That is not the case. It is the job of politicians elected to the European Parliament or domestically to analyse how a suite of policies is working for the people that they represent. No one in the EPP is suggesting that the target should be changed, but in certain areas, not every area, but in certain areas, for example, when we talk about technology neutrality, when we talk about certain power, nuclear power and so on, that we do need to pause, because our ambition has to be balanced with ensuring that our continent remains competitive, so that we can protect our weaker communities that are being affected disproportionately from transitioning. So I have to totally reject this falsehood that somehow the EPP is tearing up the Green Deal that our President von der Leyen actually championed.
Right?
And we need to look at our communities and our sectors in a way that we do not, by virtue of our shared ambition to decarbonize the European Union, that at the same time we don't deindustrialize it and not be in a position to protect our weakest through the social market economy that I say is the strength of our European Union. So it's an important debate. It can't be simplified by putting one political group into somehow calling us climate deniers. That is not the case. But nuclear power, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, we need to embrace technology, but we need also to protect certain sectors and the jobs and families that they support, and go through the issues piece by piece, ensure we have food security. Our farming communities and our fishing communities need to be protected so we as Europeans can feed ourselves, while at the same time protecting the way of life of our rural communities and our agricultural communities. So please, for this debate, let's not oversimplify it and describe the European People Party, who, as I say, have championed the Green Deal and led it forward with vigour, as somehow now stepping back. That is not the case.
Can I just say, I know you want to come in, so if I can tell, the last part of the discussion, I plan to have the real how politics, okay, in terms of the European Parliament politics. And so I promise all of you on the stage that the last part of the discussion will be about how the role of the European Parliament and its groups in all these different areas. Before we just get there, so please bear with me, there are so many questions coming from the audience on this section. I will just take 3 in the interest of time and invite some of you, all of you, to respond maybe to 1 or 2. We haven't got time for all of you to respond to each and every question. So the 3 questions I picked out are, how will the green transition be squared with the imperatives of economic and geopolitical security in the next legislative cycle? That's one question. Bear with me while I find the next one. Next question, Europe is facing many challenges, among them the aging population and mass migration. Do you think that more friendly European immigration policy will help to solve the problem of a shrinking European workforce? And then finally, we can't have a discussion in Brussels at the moment without mentioning AI, if I can find it. When it comes to new technologies such as cloud computing or AI, should Europe prioritize sovereignty or performance? And even a question about facial recognition. So I would suggest if you just pick out one of those questions, each of you in turn, and then we'll move on to the last 20 minutes. This evening's discussion, talking about the hard politics of the European Parliament. Lars, over to you. Which question would you like to answer?
Thank you. Number 2, yes, of course, we are dependent as European societies on migration. And we have a history of migration to Europe since a very long time, and after World War II especially. So focusing on Germany, we have a fantastic diaspora of people from many, many different countries who have contributed to the wealth of our country and to the wealth of other European countries, and they are an integral part of our societies. On the other hand, this is no but on the other hand, I think we need some kind of mechanism to regulate migration, how it is currently happening, because it is a huge, I wouldn't even say only financial, but a social burden to our societies, and it has the potential to undermine solidarity in our societies in Europe. So yes, we need migration, but the way it is currently happening, I think this is very dangerous and it can't go on like that. So we need probably a set of tools to guarantee, to safeguard migration coming into Europe, to the European Union member states. And maybe we also need some kind of criteria, like other countries have put in place, what kind of qualifications we might need for our societies and economies, apart from guaranteeing migration or asylum for political reasons. And that is paramount, I think, for safeguarding solidarity in our societies, because coming back to Germany and some other countries, you can see that there are parties on the far left and on the far right that are exploiting the situation, that there is no regulation to this question. And I think we really have to put ideology aside. Of course, it is good to help people who are facing political threats, who have to leave their countries for sexual, political, religious reasons. But the way it is currently, or in the couple of, say, 10 years, especially since 2015, happening, this is unsustainable and it's very dangerous. It is undermining our democratic societies.
Sophie, back to you.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm going to say something on all three issues because I can't choose. Let's start with the migration one. You know, migration exists, and it has existed since the beginning of times. It's not something you can switch on or off. But we do need to regulate it. We also need to recognize it's there. We also need to recognize that, you know, the composition of the population is changing, not even so much as a result of migration, but because of demographic change within the European Union. Now, most people are actually okay with this, but you know, the thing they're worried about is, will I still be able to find a home? Can I send my kids to a good school? Will there still be a post office in my village? Will there be a bus stop, which is a very topical debate in Belgium at the moment? You know, will I be treated equally to others? Will I have equal opportunities? Those are the things that we should be addressing. Those are the things that people are worried about. And then they will also, you know, then migration will also something which indeed will enrich our societies. Second, very briefly on AI. We have to embrace all the opportunities that it offers us, but I think we have to be very, very wary. We have created a wide range of tools for law enforcement and security purposes in the last 20 years or so, and when they exist and when we allow it, they will be abused. Facial recognition is being abused as we speak. I was the rapporteur for the spyware report. Those things are being abused, not by foreign actors, no, by our own governments against us. So let's be very careful there and not create unnecessary tools. And thirdly, about the transition and the economic benefits or downsides. I think it will have benefits. And actually, if you look what we have done over the last 3 years, it is amazing how under pressure of the circumstances, we made a very rapid transition when it comes to energy consumption, energy sources. It's really, you know, people would have never predicted that that was possible. So we can do a lot. It has benefited a lot of people. And here I respectfully and friendly disagree slightly with my EPP friend, because it is true that the EPP, but in fairness, also members of my group, of his group, have been defending, as you say, the interests of their electorate. The point about, however, about climate policies is that they affect not only your constituents, but the whole planet. And it has also meant that we lost the battle with the Chinese, because I'm sorry, in a number of areas like electric cars, we are not global leaders anymore. And why did we lose it? Because the German, French and other national car industries literally hit the brakes, spoke to their national leaders and said, not so fast, because we have vested interests, you know. And this is the result. So hitting the brakes actually makes us poorer, whereas hitting the accelerator would have made us more prosperous. So, you know, let's step up the pace with the transition, because it will all make us better off.
Okay, Juan, I can see the microphone burning in your hand.
The bottom line, the common bottom line between the 3 points that have been made is that they refer to processes which are way beyond the reach of individual member states. All of them take a European scale of response. Let's get started with migration. Migration, and hence asylum-related matters, used to be the sole competence of the sovereign member states for centuries, but not anymore. The Lisbon Treaty makes it clearly that the legal mandate, which is binding for all the member states, to put in place a European common migration system and a European common asylum system, meaning laws, of which the European Parliament is a lawmaker. Second, it happens that certainly it's the most divisive and challenging issue around in the European agenda, but mostly because it is overwhelmingly dominated by a negative look which has to be overhauled. Migration is largely perceived by Europeans as a threat. Threat to our identity, threat to our security. It is not. It is a fact. For one thing, it is a fact, whereas asylum, it is a right. And they need to be regulated for sure. That's what we've been trying from the European Parliament for some years now, with a lot of hard work, because we are, of course, encountering many resistances, precisely because of the predominant negative approach that has to be overhauled. In my understanding, it is the ultimate example of the contradiction between European interest and European perceptions. That means that European interest, certainly, it is to put in place some common European scale of responses to the migratory facts, which are beyond the scope of individual member states, strengthening our capacity to put in place an integrated system, particularly in the external borders of the European Union, and accounting for the fundamental rights involved, or the human rights involved, that takes a European scale of response, and the aging social fabric of the European Union, which is declining its importance in relevance in every parameter of a global scale. So it takes a more positive approach to migration, but of course, led by rules and by legislation, which is precisely what we're trying to put in place. The thing is that we need to combine an integrated management of the external borders, shared responsibility, and solidarity. And you know what? Those are exactly the mandates of the Treaty of Lisbon. Those are exactly the mandates of the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union. And yet, they are to be accomplished, because so far they have been missing. We have been working real hard, this mandate of the European Parliament, in order to combine that balance between shared responsibility and what we call binding solidarity when needed. Binding solidarity so that particularly frontline member states and regions which are in the frontline member states, like Lampedusa, like the Canaries, like the Aegean Islands in Greece, are not left on their own, is crying out, where is Europe? Where's the European scale of response? We can see it, but we need it. So that is the kind of answer we need to provide in order to not only strike the balance, change the attitude towards migration, but also making the best of it, because it actually reduces European aging demography, and it can be a very solid contribution to our social pillar, because migrants are hard workers to begin with, and they deserve social rights. But the same goes as to the other two pillars. Both artificial intelligence, as it has been said, it takes the regulatory power of the European Union. Otherwise, there is no way we can actually face the giants which are on the move. And the same goes with the green transition. The green transition is absolutely a must. We actually need to decarbonize. We actually need to combine forces in order to combat climate change. But there is no way for individual member states to make a difference. We need to do it together and care about the consequences at the European scale.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Juan. Hannah, give you quite brief, if you can, and Dara also. Over to you.
We sometimes tend to forget that migrants played a very large part in building Germany and Europe after it has been destroyed by right-wing nationalism. And we sometimes tend to forget that if we look at the contribution of migrants to our social services, they by far outweigh the costs of initial years when they arrive, or of asylum seekers, where indeed, according to the treaties, it is our role to take good care of them. And we sometimes tend to forget that a number of the founding fathers and mothers of this European Union could only do so because they could return from political asylum that they were given elsewhere. So I really hope, despite the need to discuss how we manage this, we never forget that these are human beings that are very important parts of their societies, that have become very important parts of our societies, and that should be the way guiding us and how we look at this. And I just want to say thank you for everyone who came to the European Union and helped us rebuild this wonderful place. On artificial intelligence, standards. It can be a very good thing helping us with a lot of problems and saving us a lot of money, or it can go terribly wrong, which is why we need to regulate it politically as far away from lobby interests as possible, and that is something the European Parliament especially can do if it dares to do, which then sets global standards. We had that already. And now the last point to the green transition, and it may actually be a nice handover to you, Dara. It is not yet the time for coalition talks, but I would say if EPP is in to finish an ambitious Green Deal, we are in as well. I just think if we don't change the ambitious goals, and we had agreement on that, and we already realized that we need to walk quite fast because we missed out a few years on reaching them. Now, having a pause and thinking it will be easier after that may not be the smartest approach.
Okay, Dara, over to you.
Very briefly, just on artificial intelligence, of course, it's a cliche, we need to be careful but embrace the technology. Just one thing I'm a little disappointed, I would have preferred, I thought it was the good opportunity where we would have worked more through the Transatlantic Technology Council with the OECD for global standards for such a new technology. Europe pushes ahead on its own and the rest of the world can be left floundering. I'm not going to discuss migration specifically, but one area that frequently is being overlooked in our European Union is the movement of people within our own borders, within the European Union. We have a situation in Ireland at the moment, all of our young medical professionals are going to Australia, New Zealand. There's very little unemployment in Ireland and the opportunities aren't there for them. The terms are difficult as well. But why is it that they're not moving to other parts of the European Union? I know it's the same for Croatians, Polish people, people from all over the continent. We need to work harder to move our people around our own continent where there's needs. And the just transition, yes, of course, there are opportunities for us as Europeans, but we also have to blend it with proper industrial policy. I believe the last factory manufacturing solar panels in Europe has closed. This was European technology. This was European innovation. So, we need to work in partnership. That's brief, Paul.
Thank you. We're going to spend the last 10 minutes talking about the hard politics and looking ahead to the next European Parliament and its likely composition, and what that means for policy making, and the role of the European Parliament in that context. Before I do that, there is a question from the audience to Hannah, okay, very briefly. It may even come from a journalist, sound like a journalist question. Okay, Hannah, the question is, last time round, the Greens did not support President van der Leyen as President of the European Commission. This time, with the risk of the pro-European parties of the centre failing to reach a majority in the face of the rise of the populist right, will the Greens this time join the von der Leyen majority?
Down your answer.
You're going to write down the answer. I think if we get a progressive majority in the parliament, that is ambitious on the Green Deal, that is ambitious on the social pillar, and that continues to see the European Union as a place where people can seek refuge, that fight for democracy and freedom elsewhere, and which is why they have to leave their home countries. I could imagine us joining.
Okay. Right, a final question to all of you briefly, because we're running out of time, about the next European Parliament. Various academic, think tank, polling organizations, surveys, studies showing there'll be a decrease in the traditional parties' number of seats. This kind of quite effective coalition, which has been in operation, some might say too effective, historically until now, but next time round, the so-called extreme left, certainly extreme right parties, predicted to gain more seats. So I'd like all of you to give me, very briefly, if you wouldn't mind, what you think, are these predictions accurate? And how do you think it'll impact the functioning of the European Parliament? And finally, also, how you think it will impact your own personal role as an individual MEP with these shifting majorities that haven't really been in place until now. Lars, and then we'll move and finish with Dara.
I do believe that the far right will gain more seats in the next term, and that the far left might also gain more seats. So it is up to all the other political groups, including ECR Group, to forge a strong kind of bond between each of us, despite all of the ideological differences, to combat these people that have been then elected to the European Parliament, because I assume that, especially from a German far-right party, which I formerly belonged to, there will be some outrageous people making outrageous comments and trying to undermine our values and our Western world, including our relationship with the United States. And therefore, I think it is time, maybe a German term, a Zeitenwende in the European Parliament, to really try to cast aside ideological differences in order to combat these people from the far left and from the far right with their, partly, not all of the ideas, or not all of them, but most of them and their ideas, dangerous approaches to European policy.
The rest of the panel, please disregard the clock. That said 3 minutes. You only have 1 minute each, okay, in case you get led astray. Sophie?
Okay, I'll try. Was it 3 or 1? I didn't get that. Well, first of all, as I said at the start, we have 4.5 months to go, and as everybody knows, a week is a long time in politics. Does it mean that the position of the far right in the polls is going to dwindle completely? No, of course not. But we have a lot of time to go out there, campaign, and speak to people, and also have a little bit of confidence in our own message. I think, first of all, the worst possible strategy is trying, as I said earlier, to try and occupy the same space as the far right, or indeed the far left, but mainly the far right. There are some political families trying to do that. That strategy has never worked anywhere, because in all countries where they tried this, the far right has grown more and more. So let's stick to our own narrative, to the things that we believe in, because that's the only thing that you can convince other people of. And secondly, I mentioned self-confidence. Look, sometimes, when you look ahead of you and you see really daunting challenges, it's very, very scary. It helps to look back and see where we came from and what we have achieved already, what we have overcome already. We've done it before, we as Europeans. Was it ever easy? No, it wasn't. But we haven't lost that capacity. Now, in Germany, there was an election this weekend where, yes, I'm wrapping up, where the AfD, okay, narrowly, but they lost an election that they were expected to win. And this was after tens of thousands of German people took to the streets in order to demonstrate against the far right and for democracy. And you know what? That's very important, because there's still a lot of people out there, the vast majority of people who believe in democracy, but they want to feel that they're part of a big community. Okay. Far right is very loud, but let's be louder about democracy. Thank you,
Sophie. 1 minute, please.
If we talk of the European Parliament as an institution, it is the only directed institution. And it's been there for 45 years, directly elected. It got started in 1979, it'll be 45 years this 2024. Throughout the institutional reform that we have seen, the European Parliament is the institution that has grown all the way, always stronger, becoming the only directly elected supranational lawmaking body in the world in fields that were long the competence of the member states, including criminal law, procedural guarantees, and migration and asylum, as I said. But in the European Parliament, there has never been a single-party majority. In order to build majority, it takes pro-European coalitions. But there have been coalitions, pro-European coalitions in the European Parliament, only declining. The numbers are declining. The major pro-European party have been declining consistently. And the prognosis is that maybe next time, the anti-European will grow to challenge the pro-European majority. In my understanding, there comes the individual dimension of the MEP seat, of every MEP seat, including mine for sure, is to put up a fight to prevent that from happening, to keep striving for pro-European majorities into the European Parliament with a strong European narrative. Of course, I am aware about the difficulties of the challenge because there is no eco-media ecosystem helping to tell the European narrative. On the contrary, the European public opinions are fragmented at the national and local level, so they are subject to fear and the exploitation of fear by fearmongers, by populists, and of course by far rights, who create insecurity and then exploit it electorally. But finally, each and every one of us has to put up a fight in order to prevent that from happening and keeping European on its feet.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Juan. Hannah.
Thank you. And at this time of the year, 5 years ago, it wasn't even sure if the Greens would be a political group again. And we came back strongest. So, as Sophie said, let's just not throw the towel. I think we are all ready for some debates and for some fighting. And we have seen millions in the streets in Germany in January. It was freaking cold. Because people are also waking up to what is the alternative. And this makes me quite optimistic to go into this election year. And I would actually like to use that journalist's question to whom I reply that, of course, the Greens are ready to form a progressive majority in the European Parliament, and hand it over to EPP, because for me that is the big question mark. Is there a clear cut towards the right? Or is it like flirting with both sides?
But I was asking the questions, Hannah. Okay, right. Over to you, Dara.
So the EPP is, without question, the clearest and strongest opponent of far-right politics in the European Union. You see that in Germany, you saw it at the weekend, and you'll continue to see it. There is no potential relationship between ID, AFD, and EPP. It's off the table and has been off the table of every EPP politician. But again, I suppose I agree, let's not throw the towel in. I certainly wouldn't accept this narrative that all the main parties are going to end up losing seats. I think there will be a realignment to an extent on the right. The far right stays out of any discussion room, but I do see the potential for some other parties to come back towards the EPP, perhaps from within ECR. But I have to, as a national politician, also mention that the European Council, who will nominate our 27 commissioners, remains, with the exception of 2 or 3 member states, run by pro-European leaders from within the main political families. So we will have a pro-European, pro-consensus, pro-coalition European Commission. We will have the same around the European Council. And I have to say, I remain optimistic that even though we will see a number of more politicians on the far right and a number of more politicians on the far left, that in the end, the centre, the pro-European majority that has worked so well under EPP leadership for a number of decades, will continue to do so. And we embrace the concept, if another political party were to be larger, of course, we would accept their right to, and I'm getting into Spitzencandidate, that'll kill you now in the last 30 seconds of the debate. But we will work together, and I think anyone listening to this debate, I think, should be comforted that what we agree on dramatically outweighs what we disagree on. And this is one of the reasons why maybe it would be a good thing to have someone in here from ID or AFD to actually get them to try and make their argumentation, because it's an argumentation they only want to make to vulnerable people who have real concerns, but they're not willing to make the debate in a public and open fashion and be questioned one-on-one. And that's the great shame, because they're cowards and they need to be called out as cowards over the next 5 months, especially on the far right, but equally on the very far left. Thank you very much.
Clearly a call to arms from everybody on the panel. Thank you very much. That was a terrific 90 minutes. I hope you agree. Incredibly rich and wide-ranging. Just remains for me to thank all of you for coming on this cold January night. Thank you those of you who put questions. I hope I managed to navigated the iPad reasonably well. My thanks to people at TheMerode, especially Alice, but my thanks to people at Versus, Olaf and Arthur for co-hosting this wonderful event. But last but not least, and on behalf of all of you in the room, my thanks to the panel. They're busy people, but they made the time very generously this evening to give so much interesting insight to what we have in store in the months ahead. Thank you all very much indeed.